Today I'm going to do 3 discussion points. These 3 discussion points are going to be based around athletic movement, overall movement for anybody. What I mean by this is I'm going to be hitting a few key areas that a lot of times people miss or maybe don't quite think about. And I want to discuss those. So I'll get going with the 3. First one, when it comes to movement, this goes for any sport, team sport stuff, goes for any lifting sport, goes for any leisure or hobby or sport outside of the team concept. So from dance to cheerleading to all of the things where you use your foot athletically, everything I talk about today is going to be applicable to you. The other thing I want to talk about is hip flexor activation, not hip flexor flexibility or mobility. I want to talk about activation, which is kind of the other side of the paradigm that I think is missed a little bit. We're going to discuss that. We're also just going to discuss overall hip mobility, a few things to do before you really start getting into the meat and potatoes of your session, of your sport, of your skill activities for the day. What are some things that you can look at, some things that you can address, and I'm going to give you some really good exercises to hopefully help with that. So one of the first things I want to talk about, and we'll start from the bottom up, is feet. So when it comes to feet, everybody kind of knows where their pressure tends to be on their feet. People, whether you walk more on the instep, on the inside arch, whether you walk more to the outside of your foot. When you run, are you more to the toes? Does your heel hit the ground? Which aren't necessarily bad things, aren't necessarily good things, they're just things. It's information. So one of the great exercises that I really like, or modalities if you will, is PVC pipe for the foot. I like this for a few reasons. One, if you have a very rigid foot, it's very similar to foam rolling or massage. It just helps warm the tissue. Makes your foot a little more malleable, a little more mobility can be had within the foot. So I like to start off sessions with this, especially if I'm going to have people jumping and running, a lot of ground-based sort of open-chained exercises, anything where you're using your foot dynamically. I recommend doing some sort of foot modality like this in the beginning. So this is really simple. I'm just going to talk about a few things I want you to notice. You're just going to take said PVC pipe and run your foot over it. You're going to hit the outside arch right here, inside arch, and then the arch that runs across the top of your foot, just behind your toes. What this does, especially if you have a tendency to not really feel your foot when you're running, this heightens your kinesthetic awareness a little bit. It heightens your proprioception, your ability to feel what your foot is going through in the exercise, right? Be able to feel sensations maybe a little more noticeably. That's what you're going to get out of doing the foam rolling or the PVC work on the foot. I like to just do kind of steady rolls down and back, right? Hitting kind of every area, all the little nooks and crannies. I don't really recommend going directly on the heel. Don't really recommend like hanging your toes out there a lot, although a good exercise is actually to open the foot and then try and grip the PVC pipe or grip the foam roller. It just helps improve grip strength. Again, also helps with proprioceptive abilities with the foot. So awesome exercise. Exercise number 1. If you're doing anything dynamically, work the foot. Do stuff with your foot. Other thing, hip flexors. These guys right here. Everyone I've ever trained, ever, I can guarantee you at least one time within a month of training them, I'm going to see a whole lot of this, right? Which isn't a bad thing, but it's what we tend to do whenever we feel the tightness sensation. And that's all well and good, right? Sometimes, especially if you have a desk job, if you have a job that requires a lot of sitting, it is very common for your hip flexors to get tight. It is not uncommon. However, the flip side of that is oftentimes that tightness also correlated with a lack of strength. So when we're talking about hip flexors, yes, you do want to stretch them. The quad stretches right there are great. There's a few others that I tend to prefer maybe a little bit more, but those are great. An exercise that I love having people do though, especially if you're running, right? Because the hip flexors, when it comes to running, play some really key roles. One, your hip flexor strength sort of predicates your knee height, right? So how high your knee is going to go. This is kind of more beginner level of stuff. As you get faster, or if you're training for speed, your hip flexor strength and your ability to activate and drive actually predicates how fast you are via frequency of cycles per second, right? How many times you can spin the foot, your overall frequency of how many times your foot can hit the ground, come back up, cycling through a full running sprint cycle. So instead of flexibility work, we're going to talk strengthening work. Super simple exercise. Don't know why I'm still holding that, but that's okay. All we're going to do, find the balance. All we're going to do is bring that knee up to hip crease height, and then from there, we're going to bring it above the hip and right back down. Here to here. Right? If you don't do this a whole lot, you're going to feel this almost immediately. A few things I like to coach right here is, especially for running, is flexed foot. I don't want to see soggy feet. Soggy feet is a negative. That's a no-go. I suppose if you are a dancer, you can certainly point the toe here if there's reason for it. But for hip flexor activation, I find that people even feel it a little bit more if you flex that foot, right? Toe to shin or toe to hip, however you want to cue it if you're a trainer. But we're going hip crease above, right here, just like that. Great sort of quick thing you can do. Do about 15 to 20 reps before you work out, before you run, before you do whatever it is you're going to do. As far as stretches, one of the ones I really like are kind of, it's an extreme isometric is what I'll call it, sort of a very low lunge with a deep stretch on the hip. It's going to be right here. So we're going to drop down into this position, get as low as you can, have good solid footing right here. We're going to take that knee off the floor, and I'm just going to get real tall right here. The taller I get, and the more I can squeeze this glute, the more I'm going to feel that hip flexor. You could just hold this thing right here, and you're going to get a lot of good value out of this. This is a very easy stretch to learn, maybe tougher to do or get good at it or increase your range of motion. But if you do feel that it's a flexibility issue, and of course, as I said, if you have a desk job, if you have a job where you're sitting a lot, that's very common. But also do the strength work. Last thing is hips. Again, everybody does these, but our hips, just like our shoulders, are a 360-degree joint. So another great exercise that I like having people do, especially if maybe they've been sedentary for a while, and even if not, even if you're an athlete, is either a standing hip rotation, kind of similar to what you would do with like functional range conditioning or FRC, or over the fence under the bridge. Over the fence under the bridge is basically a hip hike here with both, and then down under the bridge. I emphasize the 360-degree ranges of motion, right? Getting as low as you can on the squat, right? Really trying to get that rotation. The other one I like is just a standing hip rotation. You can use a dowel, foam roller to have your balance, or try and balance on your own, but you're just internally rotating, externally rotating, coming back all the way around, and plant. The main thing I see people do, a lot of people do these stretches or movements, but they don't take their time in it. They don't live in it. They don't focus on what they're doing. So they're not really maximizing the full value of what they can potentially get out of the exercise. So while doing it, I really want you to be thinking about control, thinking about your foot here, right? The foot that's planted. Do you have nice, strong, firm balance? Are you hunching over? Are you standing tall? All the things that are really important overall success of a movement taking place. Are you doing those things? Are you paying attention to those things? Sometimes you can notice issues before the workout starts. Maybe your hip feels a little tweaky. Running it through that range of motion might help with the tweakiness a little bit. Just a few things to think about. Hope you guys enjoyed the live. I will again try and do these more often. But thank you for checking it out. Have a great day. Adios.